The Michael Crichton book for February 2022 is Prey, so let's talk about it. Welcome back to the Michael Crichton read along, you guys. If you are the one or two people that watch these videos, you know I got this idea to read one Michael Crichton book per month. I got this idea from Mike's Book Reviews channel here on YouTube, my favorite channel for all things book related. He talks a lot about sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and a bunch of other fun stuff too. He's got a great channel. I really highly recommend you go check it out. Unfortunately, he's not really doing these Michael Crichton reviews very much anymore. He said he's still going to squeeze them in when he can, but he's not on that fixed schedule of one book per month. I, on the other hand, I'm trying my best to keep up with that schedule. And actually, with Prey, I was able to finish it before the end of February, like I had mentioned in my last video. I finished Timeline literally like 5 days before the end of February. And Prey was such a fast read that I finished this literally, it was literally like a few minutes before midnight on February 28th, but I did it. So I finished it. It's a really quick read. This book kept me up late quite a few nights, well, pretty much every one of those nights from like last Thursday, today's Tuesday, March 1st, my brother's birthday. Happy birthday, bro. Anyway, last Thursday until yesterday, which was the 28th, I basically stayed up late every night to try to squeeze a few more pages in. This was a really engaging, really exciting read. I loved it. I guess I should back up a little bit and introduce it. So sorry, I'm just jumping right in, telling you I love the book. This is one of my favorites so far in this whole adventure. All right, so the book itself, I'm going to try to keep this vague. I want to keep these reviews as short as I can. You know, I have a tendency to ramble. Prey, you might be able to tell from the cover, it's about nanoparticles, this whole concept of like nanobots, nanotechnology, but also it's mixed in this story with microbiology, bacteria and stuff like that, microorganisms. And honestly, I think maybe that's all I really want to say about like what the book is about. You know, it's a Michael Crichton book, so something's going to go wrong. Things are going to get dangerous and scary. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of all I'm going to say about it. It is freaking good, you guys. You should read this book. Like, I would 100% recommend this to almost everyone. The only people I think maybe that wouldn't appreciate this book are maybe people like my wife that are not going to be happy about reading F words. So, yeah, there's a good amount of language. But other than that, this was just like an amazing book. One of the best books I've read in quite a while. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just jumping into how much I loved it. Let's talk about the pros and the cons. So the pros of this book, right from the get-go, I just felt like this connected so much, or I connected so much better to this book than the last few Crichton books. And I think that's because this book is told from in a first-person narrative, like the narrator is telling you, I did this, I did that kind of thing. And I don't know, it just worked a lot better for me, I guess. Like Timeline, everything felt distant. Airframe, similar, you know, it wasn't as engaging. This one, I was in it. I was committed right from the beginning. I think it's because of the first person narrative and also because the main character, he's a stay-at-home dad and I'm a dad. I'm not a stay-at-home dad, but I am, you know, I try to be involved with my kids. I love playing around with my kids. I have young children. And like the first maybe third of the book is just a lot of stuff about him being a dad and dealing with his bratty kids. And if you have kids, you know, they can be difficult at times. You love them and they're tons of fun, but they drive you crazy. And this character's kids, his name is Jack Foreman, by the way. I always forget to tell like character names. This guy's kids are bratty. They're not as bad as like the Jurassic Park kids. They're not like annoying, but they're just kids. They're selfish. Kids are selfish. And so he's going through all these issues and stuff. He's trying to find a job. He's been unemployed for a while. I went through that. Maybe that's why I connected so well. I was unemployed for like a year at one point while I had my wife and a young baby that I was expected to provide for. You know, it was a tough situation. And so this guy, Jack Foreman, he's going through something similar. But in his case, his wife is working. She's become this like vice president of a fancy tech company, and she's getting involved with this new experimental stuff that they're doing with nanoparticles, and some mistakes are made, let's say, and some dangerous stuff begins to happen. So anyway, those are a couple of the biggest pros for me. Just great character work. The characters felt like real people. First person narrative. I really connected to the main narrator guy. He's just, even just him describing going to the grocery store, like he describes a lot of mundane stuff. And I'm just like, yes, I loved it. I'm reading this. He's talking about taking his baby to the ER because she got a rash. And I'm like, I've been there, dude. Like, I'm loving this. I don't know why it was so engaging. It wasn't even like, it's only action packed in the second half of the book, but I was so into it right from the beginning. It's kind of bizarre, actually. Another pro is there's a good amount of mystery. I'm sort of on the fence about this because one of my pros is that there's a good amount of mystery, and one of my cons is that it's kind of predictable. There's a little bit of both. Like, you don't know exactly what's going on, but a lot of times you can kind of see what's gonna be happening soon. But I'll talk more about that in the cons section of this video. Another pro is that there's some pretty cool action. I mentioned that already, right? There's some, toward the end of the book, like the second half, there are explosions, there's death, there's fights, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. It's got a good amount of action, and also some nice creepy moments. There was one moment in particular when they're out in the desert and they see something in the bush. There's something moving around in the bush. That moment just gave me chills. I was just like, oh man, like I had to sit down. It was so well written. It was so creepy. So yeah, those are a couple more pros. Good action, good creep factor at several points, especially when you get closer to the end. And another pro, this might not be a pro for some people. I personally like it. I know a lot of people, you know, it might seem like maybe I'm a juvenile type reader. I don't know. I just like things to be explained to me. A lot of people like ambiguous books where you have to kind of dig and maybe read it 2 or 3 times in order to get the deeper meaning and put things together. And I can enjoy that sometimes, but sometimes I just like a little epilogue at the end where it kind of just explains everything. Like the Harry Potter books, when I read those as a kid, I really appreciated that. There was always that scene at the end where like Harry's in the office with Dumbledore and Dumbledore's like explains all the stuff that happened. I like that. And this book has something kind of like that. It kind of goes through all these things, all those mystery elements that I mentioned earlier, and it explains what was really happening. Probably, you know, if you're an attentive reader, you probably already put it together. I put together almost everything, but it was kind of nice to have it like spelled out. Again, not everybody's going to enjoy that. I think if it's well done, it can be a pro. Sometimes it is a little too heavy-handed though, right? Sometimes you're like, yeah, I knew that. Why are you explaining this? So I don't know. I felt like this one was kind of a perfect balance of mystery, a little bit of predictability, so you can kind of feel smart as you're reading it. You're like, ooh, I know what's about to happen, and then it happens, so you feel kind of validated. A good mix of that, along with explanation at the end. It was just perfect. This was like one of the best books I can remember reading in a long time. Like this book is close to perfect. If it weren't for all those F words, I think it might be the perfect book for me. Now a few of the cons. It's fairly science heavy. That was another reason actually I forgot to mention that I feel maybe I connected to this one a little bit more because I don't know anything about the science in this book. I don't know anything, I don't know the first thing about nanoparticles. I know very little about biology, a bit, you know, just what I learned in high school, basically. So I guess I knew enough to like follow along and it made sense, but it was something new to me. It wasn't something that I had heard before. I think some of the last few books that I read from Michael Crichton, it was kind of like, yeah, I've heard a lot of this stuff before, so it wasn't that interesting. It wasn't something new to me. But this one, it was all new, basically, and so it was engaging. And why am I talking about more pros? I'm supposed to be talking about cons here. Oh, it was fairly science heavy. Yeah, and if you read reviews online, a lot of people, that's like one of their biggest complaints. Michael Crichton, one thing that I feel like, I don't know if he just struggles with it or if it was just his style, you know, like he didn't bother trying to not do this. But, you know, a lot of authors, a big thing that they try to do is world building while telling the story. They don't want to pause the narrative to explain stuff. Michael Crichton definitely pauses the narrative to explain stuff. People will be having a conversation and they'll say something, you know, this guy, Jack Foreman, he's asking, well, how does your company do this thing? You know, how do you address this problem? And then he'll pause and he'll take 4, 5, 6 paragraphs, a page or two to explain sort of the background of that problem in the industry that he works in. And that happened throughout the book pretty often. Right? It's interesting, but it does pause the narrative. So if you don't like that, you might get annoyed with this. I know some people did, according to the reviews that I've seen online. Another potential con, I mentioned it already, it's a little predictable. There are several points where, like I said, I didn't feel like this was a bad thing, but some people might think it's a bad thing. There's several points where you're like, oh, I bet this is going to happen, or I bet that person is really doing this, you know, or like when they say that, I bet actually they're lying and kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, probably if you think that's what's going on, it probably is what's going on. It's a little bit on the predictable side, but it's so well written that it kind of didn't bother me at all, you know? If a story is not well written and it's predictable, then it gets boring. But if it's well written and it's predictable, then like I said earlier, it kind of makes you feel smart. It kind of makes you feel validated because you're following along. It's still engaging because it's written well, but then you guess what's going to happen and then it happens and you feel like, oh yeah, I'm smart. I did that. I guessed it. I saw it coming or whatever. Maybe I'm crazy, but that was my reaction to the predictable parts of this story. Now, there were a few things that were not super predictable that I didn't see coming. And so I keep mentioning, it had a good balance. It was like a perfect balance of predictability and unpredictability. One other con, I guess I should mention, and I've already mentioned it once or twice, it did have quite a few F words. You know, as I was reading this, I was thinking, wow, this is the best Crichton I've read since Sphere. If you watch my Sphere video, or if you want to watch it, click on the card. That has been by far my #1 favorite Crichton book so far. And this one really gave it a run for its money. And even now, I can't decide which one I liked more. I think maybe I have to give it to Sphere just because it didn't have a lot of swear words. It didn't have hardly any, if I remember right. This one does have quite a few F words. And again, I know a lot of people, that doesn't matter to them at all, but that's just me. That's just me. If the F word doesn't bother you, then you know you're not going to have any problem. If the F word does bother you, it might be a little bit annoying. That's how I saw it. It was just like a little bit of an annoyance. Nothing more than that. Not a huge deal. But I would have preferred it without all the F words. So I think maybe I have to give it to Sphere. But then again, this book was really good. This story was really fantastic. So it's still kind of up in the air. Sphere or Prey? I don't know. The last con for me, this was the one that bothered me the most. But still, it was okay. It just had kind of not a lot really. But probably 2 or 3 kind of big moments in the book were just kind of over the top and ridiculous. Especially, you can kind of tell, I grew up out in the country. My brother is a semi-professional motorcycle rider. And you can tell Michael Crichton has, I don't want to like make judgments, maybe I'm completely wrong, but doesn't seem to have a lot of experience on dirt bikes or ATVs, four-wheelers, quads, whatever you want to call them. I grew up calling them four-wheelers. There's some of the things that he mentions about him that I'm like, that doesn't happen. That's not a thing. So it kind of pulled me out of the story just slightly. But like I said, again, I'll say it one more time. It's so well written, it didn't bother me. Again, not to talk about Harry Potter too much. Harry Potter is kind of the same way. There's a lot of issues with Harry Potter. There's a ton of plot holes. There's a lot of goofy, ridiculous stuff. But it's so well written, it doesn't bother me. You know, the story is still so good that I can kind of overlook all that stuff. And that's how I felt about this story. There's some moments where you're like, that was kind of, it was so over the top. It was kind of silly. It was kind of ridiculous. But it was awesome too. It's kind of like a Marvel movie, you know? It's like a little bit too big, a little bit too over the top. But it was still cool to watch, right? So, yeah. Again, some of those might be cons for you. Some of them might not be. Whatever. Those are my pros and my cons. So overall, if you couldn't tell already, I freaking love this book, you guys. This was a really dang good book. That's my review for Prey. Sorry, I rambled more than I should have, and it got longer than I wanted it to be. But whatever. Next month, join me for reading State of Fear. I'm kind of excited for this one. It's about global warming, apparently, and it's kind of controversial from what I have heard. I don't know what it's actually about, like what the actual story is, but I've just heard that a lot of people don't like the stance that he takes. So I'm kind of excited to see what that's all about. It is a thicker book. It's close to 700 pages. So, but I've got a 2-week break. We're going to have spring break coming up here in a couple weeks. So hopefully I'll be able to finish this in the month of March. And join me then to see what I have to say about it if you care. Later.